Hi guys, Ho Croston. Hope you've had a good Christmas. I've had quite a lot of messages and stuff about asking if I can do some more videos, but this time about some small stillwater fishing. I guess in the UK, small stillwater fishing is probably one of the most popular types of fishing there is. We've got a lot of, good small stillwater fisheries that are very, very heavily stocked. And I do fish quite a lot of those, especially through the winter months, to be honest, when the rivers are a little bit more shut down, or we've got high water and I can't get out grayling fishing. So I've been doing quite a lot of small stillwater fishing over Christmas. Most of the rivers have been either out of condition or inaccessible because of the restrictions. So I've spent pretty much the whole Christmas period small stillwater fishing, and to be fair, I've had some really good success. What I thought I'd do is in this video is try and give you a few pointers to help you make the most of your day on a small stillwater. I get asked a lot when I'm out fishing, what you're catching on. You seem to be getting a lot of fish and I'm struggling. I don't understand. I've been here 4 or 5 times and I've only had 3 or 4 takes. What am I doing wrong? So first of all, what you've got to try and understand is with these small stillwater fisheries that a lot of us go to in the winter, we are fishing in a very, very artificial scenario. And the actual fish density in them is massively higher than it is in a natural venue. Most of these places are incredibly well stocked. Even if you think that, they haven't been stocked for a while, you're normally fishing over hundreds and hundreds of fish in that body of water. What you've got to keep in mind is that those fish, once they've been put in and they've sort of survived the initial onslaught of being caught on an intermediate line with a big lure on it, pulled back quite fast, they wise up quite quickly. They'll get caught once, twice maybe by those kind of tactics. But after that, they tend to shut down a little bit from the intermediate line and a pulled lure kind of deal. Now, I'm a sort of firm believer that there's 3 types of fish in a small stillwater. There's the recently introduced fish that's just been put in, that's charging around in the lake. They're quite aggressive, and they'll have a go at most things pulled back on an intermediate line. There's fish that have been caught and released. They've been pricked. They've been hooked and lost, quite often more than once. That are a little bit shyer, and quite often you'll pick those ones up on the indicator, fishing something big and daft that just sits there in the water. They're not quite as suspicious of it because it's not moving. And then you've got the fish which are more long-term residents, which have actually started to sort of switch onto the feed more natural. And they're typically trying to, they're eating smaller stuff, and you've got to be a little bit more canny when you're fishing for them. Although those fish can be absolute suckers for the indicator as well, because they're swimming around looking for something to eat. And sometimes hanging a big something that looks like food in front of them under an indicator is the best way to get them. The single biggest mistake that I see in people fishing in small still waters when they're struggling is usually people fishing too fast. I've seen it a lot over the Christmas period. We've had some cold weather, which really tends to shut the fish down. Even recently stocked fish will get shut down by big changes in cold water temperature. And you see a lot of guys going with an intermediate line and a lure. They throw it out, they pull it back, and if they don't get a take or they don't get a fish, the fishery's not been stocked properly. The unfortunate fact of the matter is that you're nearly always fishing over hundreds and hundreds of fish. Temperature on fish can have a massive, massive effect. Many years ago, I used to work on a fish farm. And if we got a very, very sudden big shift in water temperature caused by, a really heavy overnight frost, the fish in the stews that have never seen a fisherman won't eat pellets very well. So the food that they're used to eating 2-3 times a day, you throw it in the stews, they'll ignore it, they'll let it float away. That sudden big temperature change can really, really knock them off. So you can have a lake that's, full of relatively recently stocked fish, big weather change, they just don't want to eat. The fish shut down and go very, very torpid. The other thing you've got to keep in mind is that when those fish are put in the lake, they're actually really heavily overfed. They don't actually have to feed for quite a long time. They could survive quite comfortably on the body weight for quite a long time. So that's why you tend to get them, fishing something a little bit more aggressively, like pulling a lure or something like that. But if that water temperature really drops, it tends to shut the fish down quite a lot. And they're not often willing to chase, a big white lure being pulled through the water at 100 miles an hour. So when I turn up at a fishery, how do I sort of try and work it out? I will nearly always set up 3 fly rods. I'll set up a midge tip, which is a floating line with a slow sinking tip. And dependent on the fishery, I'll have either 2 or 3 flies on that. And the fly choice will depend to some degree on the day. But on that midge tip, I can fish everything from a washing line setup quite high in the surface, right the way down to, 20 foot plus in the water column, dependent on what flies I put on. So that setup is a very, very good way for me to find the depth quite quickly. The second rod I'll have set up is usually an indicator. The indicator is a deadly way of fishing. It isn't the only way to fish. A lot of people will fish nothing but an indicator, which is a big mistake in my opinion. Some days it'll produce you 20 fish, other days it'll produce you absolutely nothing. It's a deadly method, but unfortunately, I have to be honest, I think it's also a method that de-skills fly fishing in a lot of ways, because it becomes a crutch for people, and it'll just sit on the indicator all the time. Don't get me wrong, I've got nothing against indicators. I use them myself all the time, but it isn't really the be-all and end-all. But the indicator is a very, very good way to find the fish, because you can present a static fly at any depth, really, from a few inches under the surface right the way down to near the bottom, and you can work out that depth very, very accurately with an indicator to find out exactly where the fish are. So it's a very, very good method. The third rod I'll have set up is usually some kind of sinking line, dependent on the depth of the fishery. It's most often either a fast intermediate or a dye 3. The good thing about a dye 3, you can fish from quite high in the water and fast to really quite deep. You can let it drop and you can fish deep and slow with it. And the dye 3 for me is a really good line, again, for finding that depth and finding the fish. So in terms of working out where those fish are going to be sitting, use a few clues. Look, can you see fish rolling and breaking on the surface? If you can, it's a good indication that they might be quite high in the water. So the best thing to do is start high in the water and work your way down through the water column. One thing you should really keep in mind as well is, usually if you're fishing above the cruising level of the fish, you will still catch them. If you're going very, very quickly past the cruising level of the fish and you're fishing below them, your take rate will decrease rapidly. One of the worst things you can do is fish beneath the fish, because they're just not seeing you fly. They seem to be far more comfortable coming up in the water column to eat than they are going down in the water column to eat, a lot of the time. The second thing I would say is, do not take for granted where the fish are going to be. I've heard it before and I've seen it put on social media. Oh, it's freezing cold, the fish are all down deep. That is not accurate. They could be anywhere in the water column. For sure, big temperature changes, sometimes it will send them down, but during the course of the day, the fish will move up and down through the water column so many times you would not believe it. Just one of the trips I had over Christmas, I caught fish at 11 feet in the morning. I caught them at about 3 feet early afternoon, and I caught them at 18 inches just before we finished fishing. So massive, massive change in where the majority of the fish were. Another thing when you come to fishing in the winter, and to be honest, personally I think fishing at any time of the year, if I'm struggling to generate takes, if I'm not getting a lot of action, I will nearly always start to fish slower rather than faster. It seems to be that by slowing things down, again, particularly in the winter in cold water, by fishing slower, you will generate a lot more takes, because you will catch recently and freshly stocked fish, the first type of fish that I talked about, fishing slow. You will catch the ones which have been pricked or caught and released and are a little bit more suspicious by fishing slow. And you will catch the long-term residents by fishing slow as well. So for me, fishing slow ticks all the boxes. So just to recap, when you go out, especially if you're on a new fishery and you're trying to work out the best way to catch them, the main things I would concentrate on in the order of relevance are how deep are the fish, work out where they are, find what depth they're at. How do they want the fly presented? Do they want it slow, fast, or static? And the last thing you should really be concerned about is what is the actual fly pattern? You know, some days they will show a preference for a certain type of fly, but it's very, very rare that it has to be a specific fly. When I'm out and about on fisheries, the number one question people ask me is, what did you catch that fish on? What was the fly pattern? Really what they should be asking is, how deep were the fish and how were you fishing it? Them are far, far more relevant than the fly pattern that you've got on. Anyway, I hope that's of some use to you. If you do see me out and about on the fisheries, always feel free to come and ask me, any questions. If I can help you, I will do. Bear in mind, if it's right before a competition, I might not tell you everything. But if you're out there and you're struggling to catch a fish or two, feel free, come and ask me a question, and I'll always do my best to give you a hand. Anyway, hopes of some use to you, and thanks a lot for listening.